Audio Jungle.
I am the Divine Prince, Ty Emmecca, Pan-African Spiritualist, Practitioner, Author, Advisor, Elagoon, Oloye, Hoodoo, Obeya, Bokur. I reside in this beautiful and legendary, historic Treme, New Orleans, Louisiana. So join me as I share food, music, culture, tradition, the rhythms, and the flavor of New Orleans voodoo. Respect the voodoo.
Honor and respect, honor and respect, honor and respect. Greetings and salutations. This is another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes. You are listening now live and always in archive at your leisure and convenience to the Divine Prince, Pan-African Spiritualist, Practitioner, Author, and Advisor, Elagoon Oloye Hoodoo Obeya Bokur, hailing from this beautiful, legendary, most enchanted city in America, New Orleans, Louisiana, the land of my ancestors and those who came before me along this spiritualist Hoodoo Obeya life path and journey. I am also joined by my beloved co-host, Queen Mother Toni Val Martinez. Sister Toni, how are you doing this evening?
Peace and blessings, beloved. Hello, everyone out there listening. I'm doing fine. Just glancing at the news saying FEMA about to lose 20% of its staff right before hurricane season. You know that's something we don't want to hear.
Yes, indeed. Not in this hurricane-prone region, calamity-prone region.
I don't know. People just gonna be on their own like it was when Hurricane Betsy and Camille happened, or else they're gonna only give you the option to take out that SBA loan if you qualify, which most people that's gonna lose is not going to qualify. And tomorrow starts Jazz Fest, which starts the height of our weekend rainy season again.
It does. Rain and Jazz Fest tend to go hand in hand.
Not just rain, storms. It usually floods so bad. Oh my God. I call it the curse of Jazz Fest.
Oh, not the curse of Jazz Fest.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. The curse of Jazz Fest. I think that's because of something that was done in the early beginning of Jazz Fest, when it was at Armstrong Park. And the man who started it, he was white, but he had a black wife. And the first one was in 1970, and it was $3 to get in to see Mahalia Jackson and Count Basie and all them people like that. And it outgrew that spot, but 3 years later, you have the gentleman who was running it most recently, Quint, I believe his first name is. When it started, he was just volunteering there. By the third year, he had took over. And the story amongst the locals is he stole Jazz Fest from them. Nah, I don't know what they mean about all that. He stole Jazz Fest from them. But Jazz Fest do not have a great track record of having a peaceful festivities without rain showing up.
Yes, indeed.
And I know it's at the racetrack where those horses are. And when that ground gets wet, it don't smell nice. And they put that hay on top of it, and that seemed to make it worse.
And it'd be so muddy.
Yes.
Mud
But
sometimes. Indeed.
a lot of those festival goers, they seem to have a good time wallowing in the mud.
Yes, indeed.
I don't go. I don't
I'm usually
go.
too busy, or I'm usually too busy or working.
I
I
haven't
often.
went I haven't went since my kids stopped performing African dance out there. And I'm not gonna lie, I didn't want to be there then. Cause the humidity and that wet ground is like you could almost see the steam coming off of it.
Mhm.
So it's not my favorite place to be.
But we certainly want to support. We certainly want to support city events. So
Yeah, we do.
some people, celebrate Jazz Fest, and that's sort of their annual thing. I supported them certainly during the pandemic and the lockdown. They even managed to win some cute items, during the Jazz Fest.
Yeah.
What do they call it? Festing at home. But for me,
Yeah.
everything equates, down to voodoo for me. And if
And
there's some
I
real.
don't like those huge crowds anyway, so I don't do the Mardi Gras, but anything with the large crowds, I don't like. Too many different spirits for me. It makes me uneasy.
Mhm.
Too many people touching me. No, 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 no. Oh, so last night we were talking about Hanks, and one thing we didn't talk about is that probably across the South, but I know here in New Orleans, because this is where I spend most of my time, you'll notice that our porches are painted blue. This odd blue that they call Hank blue. And that's to keep the Hanks away. That's another way we protect our houses here. And it's very prevalent also. And if you go to the paint store and you don't know the exact blue it is, because blue comes in a large range of colors, just ask them for Hank blue. It's the actual paint color. It's called Hank blue.
What's still interesting and intriguing to me is, when we say voodoo outright, people will say, "Oh, well, I don't mess with that," or even in the best case scenario, I don't know anything about that. Or we look at even our experience, you and I and our family. We saw things that we later identified and came to understand to either be voodoo or have some root connection to voodoo. But we often didn't hear that language being used, the trigger words, conjure, root work, weren't always used, at least out loud, and above a whisper. I find it interesting, though, particularly when you ask a demographic of a particular age, um, what they know about voodoo, or when's the first time you were exposed to voodoo. Again, many will say, well, they don't know, or they didn't see it, or they weren't taught about it. But you start asking them, things, behaviors, maybe regional, cultural, family nuances, b- black eyed peas on New Year's Eve, or the broom by the front door, or over the door. You often won't hear voodoo with four O's, or with you. You often will not hear hoodoo or root work or conjure, or any of the trigger words. Uh, but they've been, elegantly masked behind ethnocultural traditions and nuances that still survive until today. And so I offer, as I always have, that it's all voodoo. We certainly interchange vowels and argue over, linguistics and regional semantics, particularly here in North America and in the US. But there's a clear and uh, distinct, for lack of better words, archaeological footprint of voodoo, hoodoo, conjure, root work that continues to be uncovered, discovered, and examined throughout the so-called American South, particularly New Orleans, the Gulf Coast, and then the Mississippi Delta, traveling up the Mississippi River, as far north as even St. Louis, and St. Joe, Missouri. So voodoo and ethnocultural African diasporic religion developed in the Mississippi River Valley, with its most prominent location certainly being New Orleans. But reports describe its practice in St. Louis and St. Joseph, Missouri, and well expanded beyond the Mississippi Valley and made its way into other regions, and other cultural nuances developed. I would even argue that the masking of hoodoo and voodoo, anything that looked of it, um, always, wore masks that tried to soften the demonstration. So even the Black spiritualist churches began integrating and amalgamating, Christian symbolism and Christian language into voodoo and hoodoo practice and tradition, um, quite possibly to soften it politically, linguistically, culturally, to again mask the tradition, or even pretend that they were indeed doing something Christian, and had abandoned these so-called superstitions, and beliefs from the old world, and influenced by really several different cultures: the Senegambia, the Bight of Benin, West Central Africa, certainly the Fan and the Ewe, uh, the what they say, the B speaking people, Benin, Togo. But then that influx of indigenous, Aboriginal, what we might call Native American influence, the Catholic influence, and certainly
Yes.
whatever we may have picked up from the church that we were exposed to at various points in history, found its way to be utilized, to again, mass tradition, hide the tradition. I don't believe synchronizing or codifying the practice was their original intent. Creating another language in which to communicate in was not their original intent. It may have been a subsequent benefit to doing so, but I think just staying alive, just survival, and then pulling on those skills, that toolbox of survival that we knew that was, locked into that ancestral DNA. I just argue that that just cannot be scrubbed away. They would want us to believe we were tricked, bamboozled, brainwashed. Somehow we ate something, drank something, and our memory of our gods and our practices somehow just vaporized. But certainly, if we could count in Fan or Ewe or Yoruba or Igbo or Hausa or even Arabic, we certainly could now count in Portuguese or Spanish or English and still maintain our divine math, still maintain our connection to the sky, the astrology, the numerology that's embedded in these systems, our ritual days, our ritual calendar, and certainly every tool available to us became a form of masking, survival, not just wanting to forget or escaping or even outright denial. Some of those, acts of denial were just survival tactics. When your very life is on the line, how many of you are going to really claim your God, claim your religion, claim, your practice when, the machetes at your throat or the foreign government, has defeated, your land and is now taking over and you're being forced to learn another language. This isn't, out of the box of reality. This has happened time and time again in the history of humanity. Uh, we just recently celebrated the debacle and the war crimes and the conditions of Vietnam, and how that has now had its effect on Louisiana and New Orleans and the Vietnamese who've integrated themselves into American culture and Louisiana culture. So this isn't imagination. This isn't creative thought. This is a day or two removed from reality, just based on the footprint of history. But we've got to move beyond the sort of retelling of the miseducation of the voodoo and really begin to look at it for what it is, call it for what it is. And so whether we want to play around with vowels and letters and linguistics or really stand up in the power of these practices and these traditions relies on every single individual under the sound of my voice, every single individual who claims, ancestral inheritance, who claims connection to indigenous aboriginal practice and tradition in any way, in any form, in any manifestation. Yes, ma'am, D Goddess. Certainly South Carolina, uh, uh, they started using terminology like low country voodoo, low country hoodoo. There indeed is a footprint relative to the Gullah Geechee people, practices, and culture that archaeologists have been able to map, if you will, on the East Coast as it relates to the practice, of voodoo, hoodoo, root work, conjure. Uh, Certainly, the Carolinas are in the zone. Uh, Blessings and abundance to you as well, Beverly X. Greetings, D Goddess, if I didn't say so, beloved. Greetings, Bordeaux. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us. We certainly appreciate you. I've offered, and I'll offer it again, that a lot of what you all are calling church, okay, is hoodoo and voodoo and Aboriginal and indigenous culture redefined. Again, now masked as Christianity for survival. And we lose sometimes that ancestral memory, due to a lack of discussion, a lack of conversation, a lack of demonstration. But again, it survives. in the very DNA that flows within us.
One thing that baffles me is the how people have forgotten. They practice certain things diligently, but have forgotten what our elders did practice it for. One of those things to me is that pennies and water in a plastic bag outside the house to keep away flies. I don't know if any of y'all tried that, but it doesn't keep away flies. Originally, the pennies in a bottle of water outside your house was to ensure that money came into the house to take care of the house. Back before they had plastic, you can find pennies in a bottle of water hanging from the rafters outside, what we would pretty much call the area above the door and stuff. And now that has made its way into being a plastic bag halfway filled with water hanging above your door to keep flies away. I don't know if anybody ever tried that, but it doesn't work. It doesn't
I
keep
found that
flies
also
away.
to be regional. I hear and see and saw that more in Texas, I think. So it could also be a regional nuance to it.
I saw it
But
in Memphis. I saw people doing it in Memphis too when I lived there.
mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm,
they would put it there, and it's supposed to have something to do with the many eyes that a fly has, and they see the pennies and think it's a bigger predator. It's a long, drawn out explanation of why
mhm,
they do it. Because I asked when I was in Memphis, I was looking for the voodoo. So I asked the Memphians that I went to their homes when we recently had gotten there after Katrina, when they were friendly groups of Memphians that would invite the Katrina survivors over to their house for barbecues and stuff, and I would notice it and I'd ask. So I seen it in Memphis. It was prevalent in Memphis too.
mhm, mhm,
But my mama told me, it was to make sure that, money came into the house. And they did it back then, but the one thing was they didn't have plastic. So they put it in a glass jar or, a glass bottle,
mhm, mhm.
and that evolved to plastic bags,
And like
as
you suggested, it also probably fell from memory, and people lost memory of why it was being done in the first place.
yes, yes. And New Orleans being the whole state of Louisiana being a Catholic state, the going into people's houses and they have saints over their doors. That was very prevalent in Black households, even those that didn't profess Catholicism. They would have the saints over their front door and their back door on a little plastic card. That little laminated plastic card. I don't know if people did that in other regions, but it was prevalent here when I was growing up. in my friend's house, you could just well to say everybody did it back in the 60s and 70s, and that horseshoe over the door also. And
What about
the
the
fun
silver fork? What about the silver fork under your mattress to keep the hank away?
or the glass of water, going back to the Hanks, um we have such a thing. I don't know what people call it in other regions, but here we call it witches riding you, or Hanks
Mhm.
riding you when you sleep, and you get that paralysis, that sleep paralysis. And you put the water in a glass under your bed too, based on the premise that many had, that was the premise for the Hank Blue on the porches also, was that Hanks can't cross water. And yeah, the fork under the bed, the glass of water under the bed to ward off Hanks. Um, I don't know what condition that a doctor would call that, but my first husband was definitely plagued by witches riding him. And I would see him when he would be in the throes of paralysis. And they say if you simply touch the person that you saw, because their eyes are wide open, it looked like they trying to speak and nothing is coming out. And I would witness him because it would wake me up, and I wouldn't touch him. Yes, I wouldn't touch him to get the hang off of him.
Yes, indeed.
I
Yes,
said the
indeed.
hang rode him because he wasn't a nice person. And that was his punishment, so I wouldn't touch him.
Hmm.
You
Yes,
know.
indeed. Well, I want to
Um,
take the time before we run out of our 30 minutes to really thank everyone for continuing to support the daily podcast, Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes, powered by, supported by, fueled by NONVD, New Orleans National Voodoo Day. And I invite you all to please continue to join us, support us, volunteer, sponsor, donate, participate in this powerful and historic uh, third year of our annual National New Orleans Voodoo Day. The spiritual medicine of voodoo brings healing and relief from the shackles of slavery that bind the master and the slave to the same chain of social division. Inspired by National Voodoo Day in Benin and led by our Black community members, New Orleans National Voodoo Day is a day of collective remembrance and spiritual reparation that is preceded by a symposium and includes a procession to the monuments at the sites of enslavement in New Orleans, a ritual to account for and seek abolition for the city's and the country's participation in the institution of slavery, homage to those ancestors who suffered through and survived the transatlantic slave trade, and honor and appreciation for the achievements of those who came out of this oppression. We started with one day of celebration and ceremony. In our second year, we grow to 2 days for education, creative expression, elevation, cultural exchange, and above all, healing. And we look forward to our third year with the symposium, the actual day of events, our press conference, and whatever other adaptations we continue to make and grow as this powerful event continues to develop here in New Orleans, but also with our Haitian community and our West African and Ouida Benin community. And so through authentic voodoo tradition, handed down through generations, regionally, where voodoo may be found, we offer a path to healing from the ongoing ramifications of slavery and racism in the United States. And so through an international partnership, a Pan-African diasporic partnership, New Orleans National Voodoo Day becomes a major annual event in New Orleans, bringing peace, relief, and healing, and connecting New Orleans, Benin, Haiti, and the major points of the transatlantic slave trade and hubs of voodoo, as well as all nations where African traditional religions are practiced. So we invite Santeria, we invite Lukumi, we invite voodoo with 4 O's, or voodoo with the U, or Haitian voodoo, or Dominican voodoo, or Brazilian voodoo. We certainly invite you all in your expression of Pan-African practice and tradition to become a part of this powerful and historic event. We continue to invite you to visit our website for more information as we continue to update at www.voodooday.org. Again, that's www.voodooday.org for more information about participation, sponsorship, volunteering, and support. We certainly appreciate you. We love you. We are grateful for those of you who continue to support us from day one, and those who continue to get on board with each passing day as we move forward into 2026 and years to come. So thank you again to everyone who comes and shows up and participates in this live weekday night podcast, 9 p.m. U.S. Central Standard Time. And whatever time that might be in your region, we're certainly grateful for the time, commitment, dedication, and energy and love that is the Queen Mother, Sister Toni Martinez. And we look forward to sharing with you again in this shared, created, sacred space at 9 p.m. again tomorrow night. Remembering that all is truly and indeed a blessing if you can just see beyond the veils, or it's all just an illusion and a test of one of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. Whatever you do, respect the voodoo. Good night all.
Good night, everyone. Have a peaceful night.
At the beginning of this, maybe I was more skeptical. As the days have gone on, I'm not sure what I think anymore.
I felt that maybe it wouldn't affect me if I personally didn't believe in it.
So, knowing what you know now, would you still get cursed?
I'm seeking out a curse, a hex to put on myself.
A curse could end your life. You're literally begging the devil to knock on your door just to prove to you that God's real.
He could curse you with stupidity, but we think you've got that down.
Despite the warnings, I'm investigating the real-world effects of dark magic.
Looks like you have a lot of love and a lot of opportunity. You are going to cause damage to that.
How do you feel after doing this?
Evil.
That must be quite seductive.
That's the power you're calling on. The devil, right? Quite seductive.
I'm going to enter into a pact with Satan.
Señor Satán, Lucifer, presentamos a este hermano. Con tu fuego purifica.
Wyong is pretty much the epicenter of all black magic. People are very scared.
to even talk about it.
Y'all better not call me at 2 o'clock in the morning talking about this man is dead. I don't want to hear that.
I have this physical feeling that something bad is coming. What have I done?
You're going to have to find faith in this in order to undo it.